So I want to congratulate the students for completing their coursework at the university and the assembled parents and partners who supported you. I know that many of you have waited for your graduation since the onset of COVID, and I commend you for your patience, but also for your achievement as well, and now this delayed celebration. It should be a great source of satisfaction for all to see the success of these students. By completing your program, you've shown, as has just been said, your perseverance and the ability to overcome challenges. In addition, you've proved that you've acquired a body of practical and technical knowledge. And I think, moreover, that you have displayed and no doubt acquired resilience and adaptability to the challenges of new coursework and ideas and patterns of thought. And I think going forward, not just from this place, but going forward for the rest of your lives, recognize that traits like perseverance, what's sometimes called grit or conscientiousness, adaptability, and resilience often get neglected when we think about education. Yet recent research shows that they are essential traits in responding to a dynamic world, a changing world. In the past, when educators assembled and people thought about knowledge, the single focus was on cognition and in particular IQ and abstract problem solving, the skills that you learned and practiced in many academic courses. Now, for good reasons, the instruction that most of you experienced was programmed and segmented, although I know you've had some practical experience in encountering actual workplace situations. But many classes are still topically organized and very heavily structured, whether it's accounting, trade theory, finance theory, asset pricing, for example. But there are many other examples I could give. And for many schools and many places in education, it's viewed as the appropriate way to teach a subject. And pedagogically, it's useful to break down topics in an organized curriculum and to say, well, learn this, learn that, and so forth. But I think we know, and we've already seen in the movie that we saw, and we'll hear more today, that life is not so neatly organized. In fact, it's not very logical at all, and the problems we face and solve every day require skills that are not easily taught in the classrooms, and they come in jumbled bundles without any apparent coherence. This is so because the pace of change and the degree of uncertainty increases each year. There's technical change in terms of workplace manufacturing and the way that goods and services are produced. In addition, there's growing political and economic uncertainty, and there's growth and contraction of markets. So the world is opening up and shutting down in some places. So success involves, as I think the school here teaches, but there's much more to learn, as I'll try to emphasize, involves practical wisdom that adapts to these changes, as well as factual knowledge. For example, one thing that's increasingly being recognized is the importance of the ability to see problems as a whole, and then to break them down to resolvable components that can be successfully addressed. And at the same time, the ability to remain calm and reflective, even under the stress of uncertainty and ambiguity, before all parts of a problem are understood, much less resolved. And also, in the face of that uncertainty and in the face of the ambiguity, where we're not even sure of what the probabilities are that confront us, the ability to act nonetheless when action is needed or best seems suited. And these challenges require much more than IQ that was frequently emphasized so much in the cognitive psychology of 50, 60 years ago. Although it doesn't hurt to be smart, we know it's sometimes possible to be too smart, to outsmart yourself. Now, the skills I'm talking about are obviously important in doing like piloting a ship or flying an aircraft or managing a firm through market swings. But they're useful even in solving abstract problems, surprisingly, and to come up with novel thoughts and solutions to practical problems, the problems we face in everyday life. These attributes of being able to think, to being able to understand the problem as a whole, and then to resolve it, is important for a flourishing, functioning life. Why? Well, as I said before, uncertainty is growing and ambiguity is growing. And the more and more as we go forward, the more and more is unknowable. Think of the discussion about AI and what the future brings with AI, or for that matter, the Ukrainian war and so forth and so on. And I think as you leave here, you might ask yourself the question, and keep asking yourself this question for the rest of your life: are you actually prepared for this world? Have you learned the right lessons? How can you make yourself better prepared to exploit the challenges you will go forward? Now, I'm not criticizing the assembled faculty. I'm sure the courses were good. In fact, I know the courses were good. And there's no question that the curriculum here is world-class and outstanding. But what I want to have you think about is to prepare yourself for what comes next, and to urge you that the learning you acquired is only start of a lifetime learning trajectory. What you will learn next and in the future, you'll learn in a very different way from your learning to date, even for those who've been at apprenticeship programs with major firms. Now, sometimes it's said that most people stop learning when they leave school. And taken literally, that means that a 60-year-old person has not learned much in 35 years. And in fact, in my own country, in policy discussions, this dictum seems sometimes sadly true, and it hurts the country when it does economic and social policy. But the point is much more general. It concerns all of us, and not just politicians and business leaders. Personally speaking, when I completed my PhD at Princeton many years ago, I was grossly ignorant, but of course I didn't know that. That's part of my ignorance, and it's part of your ignorance as well as you leave. I knew a lot of tools, but I didn't know exactly how to apply them, or how to analyze the unstructured problems that characterize frontier academic research and business and academic and administrative practice. For example, I learned a lot of old-fashioned Keynesian macroeconomics that was being replaced and challenged when I was a student. To my surprise, however, this old body of thought has been revived in part because its replacement theory ignored the crucial role of money and finance in the economy. However, looking at this coming around full circle, I am personally horrified by the reemergence of the Phillips curve as a tool of policy, given the hard lessons learned about it back in the 60s and 70s that seem to be forgotten as we go forward. Oops. So in this case, the adage that people quit learning when they leave school may sadly be true, and it seems to characterize a lot of public policy today. But be that as it may, I think it's important to learn that what I learned after graduation and what you will learn after graduation will play a much greater role in your thinking and research, and will play a much greater role in the thinking of your lives as you go forward. It's not just the contrast between theory and practice, although that is a major distinction. It's because of this change I referred to earlier. And the question is, how do we cope with that? Do we work harder in the same ways? Do we repeat the lessons that we learned in school and apply them more rigorously? No, I think not really. You can learn and extract what lessons are relevant. But instead, I ask you to learn something that is not taught so much. It's not something that's taught much at all, except actually, surprisingly, recently in early childhood education and in some of the more creative early schooling patterns. And that is to learn to play and play hard, and to build new skills through play, and to maintain an active curiosity about things. Not necessarily anything of immediate use. Practice what the economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen, the person who wrote the famous book about the theory of the leisure class, called idle curiosity. He called that an instinct. He was writing about the same time as Freud, but he thought idle curiosity was an instinct that made us human. And I'm telling you then, like Veblen was many years ago, I'm telling you to play, to try new things and to imagine new things, and to never quit playing and experimenting with and imagining new possibilities and new worlds. I can honestly say, based on my own life of experience, I've never learned a useless idea. I mean an idea now, not just gossip, diversion, or escape. And I've heard plenty of that, and we've all heard plenty of that. But new ideas, images, art, and technology shape our world and views in ways we can't really anticipate. So don't be too hard-nosed. Consider the lessons about life and humanity that appear way outside the curriculum of an economics program, in the writings of someone like Shakespeare, Cervantes, Unamuno, Dostoevsky, Mann. We can go through a long list, even of science fiction authors and others. Literature, drama, and film confront us with new perspectives. This writing and these challenges to our conventional thinking shape the way we interpret the world and help us interpret ourselves and whom we are and what we might become. So pondering and playing with possibilities is an immensely fruitful activity. It's a way to stretch your imaginations and to think well outside standard ways. Science fiction is just a recent example of it paved the way for a lot of modern science. Well, why am I suggesting this? This sounds very bizarre for an economist to be talking about Shakespeare, Jules Verne, and other writers. Because a lot of economics you've learned, and a lot of the standard book learning starts by assuming people with stable preferences face very stable situations and make informed choices, or even make choices under uncertainty. But in truth, and this is something you really should embody in your lives and in going forward from here, understand that you're in the process of becoming, however old we are. So the economics we study as new data and ideas become available. So what we're learning then is learning from this, not just about the world, but about ourselves. And as we open our eyes and imbibe new experiences, we discover new aspects of ourselves and our world. If you're open to new experience and new thoughts, whatever your age, new technologies, you will gain a deeper understanding of yourself and the world. That's what personal growth is about. Experimentation with new ideas, new technologies, even new relationships. To experiment is to run a risk, and that's always the problem with experimentation. And failure is a real possibility. But I would say don't fear it. It's a powerful source of learning and self-knowledge, and that's true at all levels of society. There's a story that's kind of personal to my own University of Chicago, a great economist named Gary Becker who developed many good ideas. Brilliant economist, won a Nobel Prize, deeply respected his work. He's now deceased. But when Becker entered Princeton as a young man, his roommate, he wanted to be a mathematician, but his roommate was a person named John Milner. I don't know if you know the name, but his roommate, who was a Fields medalist, a man who was really much better at mathematics. So Becker tried math, but he saw that he was inferior. He went into social science and became a brilliant economist. A similar story can be told about many, many successful scholars, businessmen, leaders in different ways. When people pursue their idle curiosity and follow their interests, things what look like failure can actually contribute to success. Another story is Max Born, who won a Nobel Prize in quantum mechanics. He started as a mathematician. He was a star student at a leading university. But his idle curiosity led him away from what he had started. And he failed, in some sense, in mathematics. He was not the mathematician he thought he had planned to be. But what he did find was a deep passion in quantum mechanics, and he was rewarded for that. There are many, many other stories I could tell. More recently, in terms of the child development that I was introduced and I have been working on quite a bit recently, and learning, not just in childhood, but in the whole life course to the very end. Influential models of parenting stress the learning content of play and failure. And in fact, this is a lesson that's been lost in the modern generation. Parents love their children. They protect them. But if they overprotect them, what's sometimes called helicopter parenting, they stifle learning. Failure teaches children about themselves. In the world of business, Jack Ma of Alabama frequently tells people that his university, which he's founded in China, seeks to train leaders of his company to fail. He said this at an assembled audience in Chicago with the then Mayor Rahm Emanuel in presence and many other dignitaries of all sorts. But what he was seeing was the following. He wanted people to take chances, that failure is not only instructive, but learning, and that practicing resilience, it teaches people to try and fail. So there is a notion that you should trial, you fail, and then you try again. And I would add that what matters is not the failure, but failure to learn from the failure. The world of successful people is populated by people who at one time or another have failed. Now, I'm not telling you to go out and fail, but I am telling you to go out and try new things. The importance of experimentation and play is true not only for personal growth, but for economies and societies as a whole. Economics teaches something called the fallacy of composition, namely, what's true for a person may not be good for a society as a whole. For example, in the study of consumption, if people save a lot, that's viewed as a bad thing because it contracts aggregate demand. However, there's an exception to that rule. Namely, an environment that encourages and rewards experimentation is a dynamic society, just as a person who tries and experiments is a dynamic, engaged person, willing to engage and benefit from the world and all the experiences that come with it. Environments with freedom at many different levels, at personal level, at a political level, at levels all different involving social interactions. What we've learned from a hard experience is that command economies that prohibited or restricted greatly this kind of experimentation give a very stark example. Extremely regulated economies, the example that's very frequently given in industrial organization classes is the Czech economy under Nazi rule and then Soviet rule. Skoda was a world leader in the 1930s, but under 80, 60, 50, maybe 70 years of rule under totalitarian regimes, its productivity, which had been world leading, was reduced. Productivity advance became great post-1990. It's reviving. Now, an economist, former colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, Deirdre McCloskey, has shown that the world economic growth and productivity since 1800 is 3,000%. If you look at literally the per capita income in 1800, around the world, it's grown by 3,000%. But there's a big debate in economics about what is it that gives rise to that. Some people say, oh, it's accumulating capital, it might be institutional change, providing laws, and so forth and so on. Now, I'm not saying those factors aren't contributors, but what I will argue is that many of the factors that are emphasized in the recent discussions were present in many countries and many societies hundreds of years ago, even in ancient China. The residual that explains this phenomenal growth in the world economy is what we would call innovation, and what McCloskey calls innovaism. The naysayers and doom peddlers who warn of stagnation fail to understand the true engine of growth. There was a book written a few years ago claiming that the world had reached the apex of its technology when the flush toilet was developed. I'm not sure I would accept that. I hope you don't accept it. The model of experimenting agent is not yet fully developed in coursework. It's not yet, and many people may be even hostile to it. But I think it's the path to the future. And I think this Darwinian, Hayekian economy with creative destruction and discovery, room enough to try and fail and learn from the failure and keep going forward from those failures. Resilience. So this is not the standard model of calculating rational agents. And for that matter, it's not the model of mistake-prone agents with foibles to be fixed by wise bureaucratic nudges. Instead, it's a model of an experimenting economic agents built on a forward-looking type of rationality. And what it is, too, it's a model of a provisional model of failure, resilience, and recovery. So it's a model of becoming and not a static model of consuming and passive pleasure. It's what my former colleague, Csikszentmihalyi, called flow. It's a model of discovery and creation of the personal and societal level. An example of power of this notion is, and I'll conclude with this remark, in the 1940s, there was a very influential study done of showing that socialism claimed to establish an equivalent, the Lange-Lerner model it was called, claimed to establish an equivalence between a planned economy and a market economy. And in fact, Stalin was so impressed with Lange was on the University of Chicago faculty at the time, that he invited Lange to apply his insights to post-war Poland. The equivalence theorem, however, ignored a fundamental process of discovery, play, and creation that gives rise to innovation, productivity, and growth. It's a static model that fails to capture the dynamism of a truly functioning market economy. When the standard model, the static model, this notion that somehow we could do some, prices could be imitated from the center rather than from the ground up, when this was applied, it failed. Not so much immediately, but in fact, as I said in the Skoda example, how it essentially retarded growth and prevented innovation and the stirring of new ideas. So today I would say go forth, dream, experiment, and embrace the unknown. The best advice I can give you is to pick yourself up if you stumble and try again. And play and never grow up if growing up means you cease to play. Thank you very much for your attention. Can I go here? Yeah.